right, I'm gonna say we go ahead and get going, and folks can join, roll in as they may. I'll stop sharing my screen since that was the only slide I had prepared. I think it's probably more useful to be able to see the faces of our wonderful panel as we start our conversation. So my name is AJ Young. I work for IFSA. I'm the Assistant Director of Global Learning and Assessment. And this is It Just Might Work, Living and Working Abroad, which is, I did not come up with that title. That was our delightful marketing staff and their brains, but just a few logistics before we get started. So we are recording the session. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear about that. And we will have the recording available if you are wanting to go back and rewatch some of the gems, I'm sure, that will come out of this conversation, but also if there are folks who were not able to make it, that will be available, and we'll let you know how to access that once the recording is up. Please, and I see pretty much everybody coming in is already muted, but just as a reminder, try to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking, just so we can reduce the amount of feedback and all of that. As I will start with some questions, introductions from the panel. I'll ask a few questions, but then we will have time towards the end for some audience Q&A. So if you do have a question that comes up, you are more than welcome to drop it in the chat box, and I will try to keep track of those. I will also be posting after I ask a question. I will be posting in the chat box what at least close to what I just asked, just in case folks have some audio or streaming concerns. And I think that's about it. And before we introduce our panel, I would love to, just from those of you who are in the audience, if you want to drop in the chat box, just maybe where you're joining us from, so we can get a sense of where people are in the world. I know our panelists are spread across, literally across the globe. So if you want to just drop in the chat where you're from, where you're joining us from, that would be great. So I said, I'm AJ. I'm joining live from the IFSA office in Indianapolis, Indiana. And our panelists are joining us from all over the world. So the first thing I'd like to, yeah, there's an Indy person, Minnesota, Brooklyn, Florida, Missouri, Maine, Nepal. I think between you and our Nepal friend in Nepal and Lesley, you all might be our farthest from Indianapolis, at least, that are joining us. Thank you. Argentina, awesome. So I will sort of just let our panelists start. My first sort of question or prompt is just if you would like to introduce yourselves, your background, and give some brief information about your experience working internationally. And Lesley, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Gloria, and then Rosanna. We'll work our way from sort of latest in the day for local time to earliest in the day. Let's do that.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you and speak with you. I'm Lesley Bartley. My pronouns are she and her. I'm originally from Bardstown, Kentucky, bourbon capital of the world. Yeehaw. And currently I am teaching 6th grade English, language arts, and social studies in Mumbai, India. But I'm staying in Delhi with my partner because right now we're teaching online. So my days are spent on a lot of Zoom calls exactly like this. I studied abroad with IFSA, which back in 2012 was actually the Alliance for Global Education. I'm not mistaken, that's how I got connected. And I studied abroad in Pune, India, and we were there for 4 months. And then when I came back, I graduated from Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, and then went on to serve in AmeriCorps for 2 years, and then received a Fulbright Nehru teaching assistantship, and went back to New Delhi, India, where I taught in a government school for 9 months. I was teaching conversational English there. So since that time in New Delhi, I was always looking for ways to get back to teaching in India specifically.
Thanks, Lesley. Gloria?
Hi everybody. My name is Gloria and I'm Spanish, but I'm currently in London, UK, and I have been here nearly 7 years now. I studied English philology, so basically that was for being an English teacher in Spain to Spanish kids, but I didn't really feel it. I really wanted to go abroad, and I came here with a temporary contract actually. But then everything went really well, and I stayed for more than I expected, and I actually worked for IFSA for nearly 2 years 2 years ago.
Thank you, Gloria. And Rosanna?
Hi, everybody. I'm Rosanna Berbeo, and I am from Los Angeles, California. And I graduated from Cal State LA here in downtown LA. And I've been the resident director in Cuba for IFSA for the last few years. Prior to that, I worked for about 15 years as a Spanish-English translator and interpreter. And through that work, I was able to spend some time in Cuba, which is how I connected with Study Abroad and eventually with IFSA. Right now I'm in the US, having had to come here after all the whole pandemic situation. But I've had extensive experience in Cuba, meeting people from all over different backgrounds, and I'm excited to share that experience with you all.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of a softball question to get us rolling. And that is, why did you want to work internationally outside your home country? What was it that drew you to international work? So I don't know if anybody has a particular desire to start with that question. Or I will call on somebody. Rosanna, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Yeah, that's easy for me. Well, I've always been excited about traveling and interested in Latin America. And for me, it was very easy. You know, the idea of living in Cuba was not scary to me at all, because after having spent time there, I just fell in love with the place and the people. So it was really that. I would say I'm attracted to a very specific place and culture and excited about being there, but also not really seeing myself as separated from the United States. A lot of times people use the word expat. I have issues with that word because it sort of seems like you're rejecting, when you say you're ex something, you've rejected it or you've stepped away from it. And I've never really seen myself like that. I've always continued to maintain my connection to the United States. And so anyway, we could talk more about that. I'm sure other people have thoughts on that too.
Thanks. Lesley, do you want to share a little bit about what drew you to working in India or working outside the US?
Yeah, it's never been really for me about working outside of the US in any other place besides India. My desires have never been really outside of India. I did teach in Thailand for 6 months during my master's practicum, but really it was about, I suppose, just it's like a gut feeling of rural Kentucky not being where I'm supposed to be at the end of the day, and not feeling like America is where I'm supposed to be at the end of the day. Not that it doesn't have those challenges of getting older and missing my parents and my family, but living here is challenging, and those challenges feel healthy, and they continue to feel healthy. And I love learning new languages and meeting new people, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just a gut feeling. It's always been a gut feeling.
Yeah, thank you. Gloria?
Yes, for me, I guess it was a little bit different. So before I came to the UK, I was working as a Spanish teacher for adults, actually, from other countries. And the salary was really low. The conditions were not great. So I thought to myself, okay, I really don't think I want this. I want to go somewhere else where the conditions are a little bit different, and the value that I can bring are definitely recognized differently. So my idea was, oh, I want to spend 1 year in Dubai, I want to spend 1 year in Singapore, 1 year in this country here and there. But I just sent one application to the UK. It worked. And like I told you before, it was the progress and the promotions can happen very quickly in this country. So that definitely made me stay.
Thank you all. I know I love hearing the different reasons of from falling in love to a specific place to just sort of thinking that like, I have this feeling that I want to be somewhere else, not because where I am is necessarily bad, but I'm drawn to be somewhere else. Or Gloria, I love your really practical, like I want something different. I want, you know, whether it's more flexibility or better pay or some of the more logistical reasons, all excellent. And I'm sure many of us can relate to at least one, if not all three of those drivers. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what are some of the sort of key aspects of the work culture or the professional culture in the place where you live. And especially if you have lived and worked in a couple of different places. And I know most of our folks who are with us are in the US, but so especially if you have some comparison to what US professional culture looks like, but just some of the key things, working style, working culture, communication style, that sort of stuff. Let's see, Gloria, do you want to start on this one? Thanks.
Of course, yeah. I have worked for companies since I arrived to the UK, and my experience has been that in general, they are really, really good in terms of being flexible and understanding with mental health, with personal issues that you might have. You are encouraged to talk to your bosses of everything you might be going through, and they are very understanding and supportive. In all the companies I work for, I kind of felt that, while I would say in Spain, it would be a little bit different in that sense. I'm not sure if there will be that understanding, but it's also very competitive. There are a lot of people in this city. All of them are very well prepared. So when you apply for a role, you really need to put everything you have from the moment you start the application, all the research, to the interview, and then of course once you're in the job to prove that that's right. But the higher the position it gets, the more competitive it gets in general. Apart from that, the benefits are really good, I would say. Payment is very good. Holiday days are very nice. In terms of packages, normally the companies provide health insurance, or they give you money for learning, or they give you bike scheme, so you buy a bike and then you get easier to work. In general, I think it's a country that is they really care about the employees.
Awesome, thank you. Rosanna?
Hi. Yeah, I think you know, there's so many different issues to talk about when we think about being a US person in Latin America. And especially for me, since I'm representing a US entity, which is the Institute for Study Abroad, you know, the first thing that you have to, or that I have to constantly think about is that I am, is my privilege, both as a white person, as a US person, having a US income in an underdeveloped country. All of these things are real issues that come into play constantly, and that I have to be thinking about constantly when I'm interacting with people. So I would say all of that influences how I interact with people doing my daily work. And it's something that I have to really check myself sometimes, because as I said, you know, it's been a number of years now. And so sometimes I sort of slip into thinking like, oh, I'm kind of Cuban, but I'm not. And so, you know, that's part of the dynamic, is also, myself vis-a-vis the Cuban people who I work with in it. And another quick point that I want to make, and this is a little bit separate, but work culture, when we're talking about work culture, I have found that, in the United States, especially in this digital age, we're so used to just having immediate answers, immediate availability. You reach out to somebody, you expect them to answer you immediately. And that's not the culture in Cuba. And I would say probably in a lot of other Latin American countries as well. It's a more paused, a slower pace. I don't like the stereotype about Caribbean time that sometimes people use, because I don't think it's true. I know people who are extremely punctual, but it is a different culture of time, and also a more formal culture, a culture where people address each other a little more formally, especially in work relations or in school relations, and always keeping in mind respect.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comments around sort of privilege and understanding your own background and identity, both racially, but also nationally, which when we're sort of in the US, we often think about diversity and privilege along identities like race or gender or sexual orientation, but not as much around nationality. And because most of us, or many of us here, are Americans, and so sort of are in that sort of similar space. So thank you for touching on that aspect as well. Yeah. Lesley, would you like to share a little bit about your experience?
Sure. Yeah, so that absolutely resonates with me as well. I work in a school where it's about 50% Indian teachers and 50% foreign teachers. So they're mostly British, Scottish, American. And just the divide or the disparity of not only income, but also just the way that Indian teachers are treated is hard to reconcile. And that becomes a part of the work culture every day. And like you said, Rosanna, sorry.
Rosanna.
It's something that we encounter constantly. And there are a lot of things available to me as a white person in India that are not available to my Indian colleagues or to me necessarily in the States. So that's definitely something to reconsider and reconsider all the time. So thanks for saying that. I was thinking or typing down notes about how, because I work in an international school, the culture does feel blended in a lot of ways, and it feels very casual in a lot of ways as well. The school was founded by an American and an Indian, so it does feel very casual, but I know in other institutions that I've worked at in India, hierarchies are very important, and they're not always visible, and that can be challenging for me to figure out who's at the top and who do I need to speak to for what. And I found that in Thailand as well. Again, I was only there for 6 months, but working in Thailand, it was very prim. I felt honestly like too big a lot of the time, like I needed to be smaller and more subservient in a lot of ways. I did not feel like my personality or my body type was accepted there, but I do feel like in India, like my mannerisms, I have a big body, I'm a fat person. So like I'm also gregarious. So I feel like that's accepted here in India. Like I can move my body around and I can gesticulate wildly. And so that's where I feel very comfortable in terms of work culture, because it does feel for me like that's my teaching style. So that's important for me for it to be accepted, where that professionalism doesn't have necessarily a box that I need to fit in, or the box that I can fit in feels very malleable. Probably because I'm a foreigner, I'm sure that my Indian colleagues do not get the same treatment. Yeah, so that's what I wrote down, AJ.
Thank you. And thank you all for bringing the really human aspect into your responses. Gloria, talking about the way that the companies you've worked for in the UK are really open to talking about mental health and being sort of, what your challenges are, not just in terms of the work you're doing, but just being a person. And, both Rosanna and Lesley talking about privilege, and especially Lesley thinking about like being an embodied person, a person with a body at work. And that is often something I think when I've spoken with students who are in college and thinking about what they want to do, so much of the focus is often on, what is the industry I want to be in? What is the type of work that I want to be doing? But you spend a lot of time at work, and I guess now in this time we're spending a lot of times at home at work, but that is also a thing that I think a lot of us really underestimate, the ability to feel comfortable sort of physically and as a person at work. And that is only complicated by being in a space potentially outside of your home country or culture. So thank you. What would you say are some of the really great things about living and working internationally? Maybe one really great thing, and then one thing that is particularly challenging or has been particularly challenging for you working internationally or outside your home country. Gloria, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. One great thing is resilient. You become very independent and you're able to know yourself and what you're capable to do and achieve.
Awesome. What is maybe one challenge that you've found working outside of Spain?
One challenge of working abroad for me is definitely having an accent, and while trying to apply for some jobs that might affect negatively.
Thank you. Yes. Lesley?
Yeah. So I got into teaching in international schools because I'm able to make a living wage, and I don't see that necessarily reflected in American public schools. Luckily, I want to be in India as well, but it is fantastic. And a lot of international teachers or teachers in international schools, they get housing paid for, they get flight allowances. You are treated well in terms of your living wage, and that's very important to me. But a challenge is language always. I'm always learning. I've been here for like 5 years here and there, but I won't ever be a native speaker of Hindi or any other regional language where I move around in India. So that's always a challenge day to day.
Thank you. Can imagine just being outside of a language that you do not feel fluent in could be really challenging. Yeah. Rosanna?
Yeah, just picking up on that last point that Lesley said, I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin. The enjoyable thing about working in another country and the challenge, which is constantly re-examining your own identity. You know, one of the exciting things about living in another country, and in my case, in a country that has always had a complicated relationship with the United States, is constantly thinking about, you know, who am I here? You know, what am I doing here? How am I contributing to something positive? In addition to my own personal enjoyment of my relationships, you know, my husband is from Cuba, a lot of my friends, and so on. So there's my own personal thing, but there's also like seeing myself as part of a bigger picture. And then on kind of the flip side is kind of picking up a little bit on what Lesley said. And this is something I've talked about with a lot of people who are from the US, but live pretty much, you know, year round in other countries, which is, I will never have the same, you know, I will never be a native speaker. I will never have the same language level. I will always stand out as a foreigner, kind of, you know, and kind of almost seeing that as a negative thing instead of embracing it, which is hard to do. It's hard to do, to embrace that, you know, but eventually we sort of come to terms with it. I don't know how long you've been there, Lesley. I don't remember how many years you said you've been, but you know, that's a hard thing, and I think it's different for each person. And you know, it's kind of like re-examining your expectations of how you see yourself in that society, how you see your role in that society, and coming to terms with, you know, like, I speak Spanish pretty well, but I know I will never have the perfect Cuban accent. So just some thoughts.
So can I add on to that? Is that okay, AJ? That's so interesting, because I grew up thinking like, I'm going to be a capable, independent woman, and that's when you talk about language and you're like, how do you re-examine your identity? It's not necessarily negative. Now I'm thinking, okay, it's not. Maybe I rely on communities now, and I become a more community-oriented person when I'm not focusing on getting my car myself getting my house cleaned myself or getting these things done by myself. It becomes a more community-based if I need help from others, and I don't necessarily do that when I'm in the US. So thanks for that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and please, I don't need to be the like traffic cop here in terms of who talks when. So I'm just trying to facilitate. So please, if there's other things you'd like to add or other questions you'd like to ask of each other for our panelists, please feel free to do so. And again, appreciating all the wonderful insights and, you know, for those of you who have studied abroad or are hoping to study abroad is such a great way to sort of try out that experience of living and working abroad. Obviously, it's for a little shorter time than you know, you might anticipate for a job, but certainly those feelings of being both an insider in a culture and an outsider of a culture at the same time. I know when I studied abroad, towards the end of my study abroad experience, I was starting to feel a little bit more like an insider, like I could navigate some of those spaces, but still very much feeling like, oh, I'm a mostly a loud American in a lot of places. And so how you navigate and sort of acknowledge and engage with that sort of dual status as a person who's working in a different country is really fascinating to me. So, so I'll maybe ask one or two more questions and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And of course, I always have more questions if folks are feeling a little reluctant to ask something of their own. But let's pivot a little to thinking more about sort of logistics or specifics. I'd love to hear what were some of the resources either you have used to find jobs outside your home country, or what resources you know of that perhaps your colleagues or friends have used to find things outside. And if anybody has something that comes to mind, I will let you just feel free to jump in.
So a few things. Back in college when I was applying for the Fulbright grant, I actually wasn't in college anymore. I was 2 years out of college, but I went back to my undergraduate institution and my study abroad advisor there actually helped me apply. And so that was just a great resource to have her around. Now that I'm teaching some online resources, and I'm happy to put these in the chat if there's any teachers in here, anybody interested in teaching. Search Associates, it's a paid subscription service, but I know that it's great for young professionals or young teachers, even young administrators or people interested in education. Is really helpful for those wanting to work abroad internationally anywhere, as well as the people that I met when I was studying abroad or working abroad. Networking, I always shied away from, and now I see it as more of building genuine relationships and being able to ask, do you know of any opportunities available? And that being completely fine. I know that especially here in Mumbai and Delhi, the two cities that I've had the most experience with, networks are everything, and who you know really helps you get where you want to be and how you want to be. And it doesn't feel like I can get on the internet and apply for a job here. I need to know others, and that's how I've gotten interviews. So making sure that you spend time to make those relationships and nurture those relationships, not for your own personal gain, but because you probably have something to give back as well. And just hate to say it, but Facebook is great to keep in touch with people all over the world. Love having a bunch of Facebook friends. So Search Associates, Facebook, and your own study abroad advisor.
Thank you, Lesley. Yes, and I love that reframing of networking. I know many of us are not as comfortable with the sort of more stereotypical understanding of networking, but definitely reframing as building relationships has helped me in that space as well. So, Gloria or Rosanna, any thoughts? Or
Sure. It's very interesting because my experience is totally different to Lesley. I had nothing when I came to this country, and never in my 4 roles, any of them actually attached to networking, the ones to another. So for me, it's been more of a lot of research, a lot of understanding what do I want to do next and how am I going to go about it. So I would follow a lot of pages on LinkedIn always up to date with any events they might have, any new projects. So when you go to the interviews, you really know what they do, their culture, their values, their mission is something that is really important nowadays, at least here in London. So I'm very happy also to share some of the pages that you can visit. However, I am assuming that they will be UK pages rather than US pages, Lesley, because yours were from there, right?
Do you mean because
your resources, are they for US people trying to apply to other countries, or are they global?
Search Associates is global. Facebook also global.
Yes. Okay, I'll share the resources that you can use if you want to work in the UK, of course. Perhaps they might not work if you want to work in Italy or in another country. But yeah, for me, it was definitely a lot of preparation, a lot of interviews, failing, learning what more, what didn't go well, asking for feedback when you finish up interview and they rejected you for some reason, sometimes even being the second one, but for some reason someone was slightly better, or they had another certifications that you didn't have. And that's another interesting point, a lot of studying. Okay, what should I do now? A course in management, a course in leadership, a course in business development, in whatever you feel, and you want to keep, of course, learning and expanding your knowledge.
Thank you. Rosanna, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Lesley was saying about the importance of networking and trying to figure out the best places to connect, especially if you're starting kind of from zero, maybe. Just really deciding like what area, what field interests me. Is it education? Is it language? When I was working as a translator, everything was networking. All of my work was, because I was a freelancer, all of my work was through networking, building on different connections and figuring out, where do my colleagues congregate? Where do they communicate? And I think it's different for every country and every culture, and maybe even every field. I know, for example, for Cuba, and I would venture to say in other countries in Latin America as well, Facebook is really important. People use it as a marketplace, as a community, places for community forums and things like that. And then I would just give a few tips. One tip would be, I have to say, Gloria, wow. I really admire the work you've done because it's not hard going cold into a place. I would always recommend, especially for a country where a different dominant language is spoken, that you visit the country first, that you spend a little time there, that you make initially shorter commitments so that you can see if you're happy there. And also I want to emphasize language. I think, there's different perspectives about living in a country where you don't really speak the language, but I think it shows respect, and it shows interest and respect for the country where you're going to live when you make a real effort to learn the language. And it doesn't mean you have to speak it perfectly, but it does mean that you make the effort. And I think that it doesn't send a positive message when you're not making that effort. And that's kind of, I don't know if anybody who's here today is interested in talking more about this whole expat thing, but, there are people who gain a reputation for kind of living in their own little bubble in another country. And I think that's really easy for people from the United States to do as well, to kind of live in a bubble in another country. And you're not going to get the same, I think, in my opinion, you're not going to get the same you're not going to get as much out of your experience in living in that country if you're living in an expat bubble. So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you. Yes. So lots of networks, relationship building, doing your research, trying some things out. And I think that is, Rosanna, a really great tip of how to find or create some of these like experimental experiences in many ways of not necessarily having to commit. And Lesley, I know you had a couple of sort of like teaching fellowships, the 9-month Fulbright teaching assistantship, right, where you were able to go in for like a little bit shorter amount of time and to say, really, does this feel good? Do I feel good here? You know, because it's a big life change, I imagine. I mean, I've moved across the US to different cities. I've never moved internationally, but I can only imagine based on that, the extra layers of complexity and both logistically, but also culturally, and the sort of experience of being there and being able to test that out would be great. My last question, I know we have a couple of questions that are popping into the chat, and so please keep that up. My last question for the panel is, what advice would you give to someone who's considering working outside their home country? And we've had a couple of tips and tricks here, but maybe one additional, and I'm sure there'll be more. But one piece of advice for folks working outside their home country. Lesley, do you want to get us started? You have your thinking face on, so maybe you want to pass.
Let me think about this one.
Yeah, take a second to think, and then any, you know, Rosanna, Gloria, whichever, or Lesley, whoever would like to jump in.
I'm kind of going to reiterate what Gloria said when she said try and fail, but also reach out to people. I've reached out to people I've never met in my life, but they're a friend of a friend, and they ended up helping me get the job that I have now. Just reach out, and you may fail, you may not get a response, someone may not respect it, but ultimately it's just a blip. So reach out.
Gloria or Rosanna?
I could say don't give up. Whenever you are abroad, you're gonna face challenges, and you're gonna face barriers in a way or another. But if it's what you want to do, definitely keep trying. You might take a job that you don't like, but if that means you're making some money in the meantime, keep trying for the right one. It will eventually arrive. And by the way, I'm not sure in other countries, but here in UK, it's not a bad thing to work 3 months here, 3 months here, 3 months there. The most likely they will ask about your experience or give examples, and that's it. But keep fighting for the right one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I think it's good to always have your own personal safety network as well. You know, the people that you can go to consult people in that country who might be people that you already knew, or they might be friends of friends or somebody's parents. But it's good to have your sort of your elders or your people that you go to when you're just not sure what's happening, and you don't need to feel like you're alone and you have to reinvent the wheel or anything.
Thank you. Yes, I'm hearing a lot of what sociologists call the strength of weak ties. So not the people that are in your like best friends, your immediate close people, but the sort of circle right outside of that. And that is often where, especially when looking for jobs, empirically, we see the most connections that get jobs, that it's often the friend of the friend or the coworker of a friend or something like that. So keep that in mind as well. So I'll turn to some questions in the chat here. Rosanna, there's one for you, but if Gloria or Lesley, you have some thoughts about this as well. Do you have formal training or certification in translation, and some asking about how you got into freelancing in language and translation in the first place?
Yes. Actually, I am certified by the American Translators Association. Which is a test that you take for those of you who are interested in working in languages. I first got into freelancing informally in the United States. I was a social activist and I did a lot of volunteering. And then I started doing it to get paid. So that's how I got into language. And I think that it's a really fun area for anyone who's interested in asking me more about freelancing or translating or interpreting, which is actually what I enjoy more than document translation. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But yeah, certification is a great way to, it kind of translates across borders where people take you more seriously than just saying you're bilingual or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yes. And there was a question, I think, further down about getting in contact with the panelists afterwards. And that is, I've talked to, I think, all of the panelists, and we can share that information when we share out the recording to folks who are registered for this. So yes, sounds like they would all be happy to connect with you and be part of your network in the future. So a question about how finding non-teaching jobs abroad for recent graduates. And there's a sort of corollary question right below that about visas, which we know is probably one of the bigger hurdles to finding work in a different country. And so any thoughts you have either about finding non-teaching jobs and also your experience with visas? And Gloria, I feel like you're not in a teaching space, so you might be our best answer for.
Oh, by the way, I don't know if I said what I'm doing actually. I'm a partnerships lead. So basically my role is now very businessy, and I feel like I studied to be a teacher and it's not related at all. And everybody asks me like, oh, did you study business? And I'm like, no, I didn't. Which is something very good. In the UK, it doesn't matter if you studied history or languages, you can end up in a role like sales or even coding. So that's really interesting. What I did is I studied, I did a summer camp in the US. So it was for Camp America. I'm not sure if you ever heard that company, which it was a study abroad. Basically, then I found a job with companies and organizations that had programs like IFSA, like Open in America was part of another AFS. I'm not sure if you ever had that company, but basically when you kind of have the transferable skills, that can be a lot. You can start obviously perhaps in a low position. It's not that you're going to get something very high at the beginning, but it's really easy to promote in this country. So you can spend perhaps 1 year, 2 years doing something, and then you move on to your next role. Not sure if that answered the question, but if someone has a specific question after this, I'm very happy to answer.
Yes, and any experience with visas that the three of you would like to share? Positive experiences, challenging experiences?
I think that's the biggest hurdle for me. I got a job with a nonprofit school here in India, and I did not get the visa. And that was really sad because I was waiting for 5 months and planning an entire life abroad. And then I ended up going to Thailand to finish my practicum. But like Gloria mentioned, I kept trying, I kept applying. I was saving up while I was in Thailand to come back to India. And that also ties in with, it's hard to get an employment visa in India oftentimes if you're not a teacher at a reputed international school, or if you're not working for maybe a big corporation is what I see others working for, like Pantene, a lot of cosmetic companies. So I don't have a lot of experience with non-teaching jobs. And I know that that's a lot of folks have trouble with that as well if you're not teaching, because it's an easy way to work abroad. But visas are a constant stress in my life. And not that it's hard to get a visa now, but it's always just kind of on the back of my mind. Like, because at any time the country can say, you don't get your visa. Every year I have to get it recertified or have to get reapproved. And my partner's here and she's Indian as well. And I want to live here. So yeah, it's something that I think about a lot. And it is a little bit of like just a pressure on me.
Yeah, excuse me. I don't have a lot to add because my main experience has been with Cuba, and it's a very particular process. They're very strict about what categories are approved for work visas. So I think I would rather just give a general tip, which is to say it's really a case-by-case basis. I don't have a sweeping answer about visas I think you just really have to do the research and network and find out what the requirements are, and then make sure you follow them as strictly as possible so that you make life easy for yourself. That would be my top tip. Just really research where you want to go and what the visa requirements. That's extremely important.
That's a great point. And I would say for those of you who maybe are like, I don't even know where to start, your study abroad office might be a good opportunity for that, because a lot of folks require visas to study abroad, but also checking in if you have like an international student office or services where they are more likely to be dealing with the US visas for students coming into the US, for those of you who are in the US, but because they have some knowledge of visa processes, they might be able to point you in a direction to some resources that you could be able to use, or at least explain sort of the general process behind what it means to get a visa and things like that. So just a couple of suggestions there. A few more questions in the chat. Question, how has your identity as a female identifying person impacted your experience moving abroad, particularly thinking about safety and cultural difference as a woman or female identifying person? Thanks, Christine. Great question.
Can I jump in here? Yes, I think that this ties in a little bit to what we were talking about before about trying to spend some time in the country where you're thinking about working abroad, because there are big cultural differences as far as, what people think is acceptable or not acceptable behavior, and how you're going to respond to that behavior. We talk a lot in Latin American countries about machismo and dealing with things like catcalling, and how you can you coexist with that? It's not a question of accepting it. It's more a question of figuring out how you will, live with that. I know of cases of people who, for example, here in Cuba, when they receive catcalls walking down a sidewalk or something, it deeply disturbs them, and I've seen that happen where they've been deeply disturbed. They feel like they have to constantly confront the individual and things like that, and so that makes it really hard to feel comfortable in a place. And I'm not saying that catcalls should be accepted or machista behavior should be accepted, but it's kind of like going back to finding community, finding out how do people locally respond to sexist behavior and that kind of thing, so that you're not dealing with it alone. I'm not sure if I'm answering the person's question. I think this was, who's the person who asked? Christine. If I'm not quite answering your question, or, oh, thumbs up. Okay, good, thank you.
Lesley or Gloria, anything to add on that?
Personally, in the UK, I think, despite of what happened not long ago, I'm not sure if you heard in the US, of course, it's been all right. I guess, like in any city, there are some areas where you have to be more careful, attentive, and there are other areas that are absolutely fine and very safe. The only thing I would say work-wise that I have realized in general is that still, when you go to a company in C levels, so high levels, is majority men.
Yeah. Thank you. Great question, Christine. Thank you. Also, just generally thinking about identity, right? Whether you identify as a woman or a feminine person, or a person who's part of the LGBTQ, or whatever that acronym looks like in the place that you are, because again, that acronym looks different in different places, and all sorts of different identities, your ability, religious affiliation, racial identity, ethnic identity, that definitely is a factor. And so great questions to be thinking about how to navigate those. A couple other questions that are more along the sort of like life abroad, living and working abroad. So about being abroad with a romantic partner or partnership of some sort, and dealing with guilt or sadness or feelings about being far away from your family and friends.
My mom, every time we talk, is like, I wish you'd come home. Every single time we talk. And every time I'm like, Mom, I'm happy. And then she'll be like, I know, honey, it's just. And so this is something that, like, it's guilt that I'm putting on myself, but I'm also getting it from my mom. And the older I get, the more I'm like, but I want my mom around when I have kids. And it gets harder the older I get to be away from my family, because those things mean more as I'm getting older for some reason. So it's there, and I try to deal with it through journaling and speaking with others and keeping in touch with my family and friends at home, but it hurts and I miss them a lot.
I was going to say that suddenly you feel you don't belong to your country, you don't belong to the other country. When I'm here, I complain about here. Like, oh, it's raining again. In Spain, we have the sun all the time. Oh, this food is not good. In Spain, we have better food. And when I'm in Spain, I'm like, oh, in London, we queue for this. In London, we do this, the other thing differently. So you will experience these kind of things, and even purchasing a sofa. Oh, I'm going to purchase a sofa. Oh, but if I purchase a sofa, that means I'm going to stay for really long here. And then it's like, don't want to tie myself up so much to this country. What if I need to leave soon? So it's really hard. It's really hard to deal with these small scenarios, but that happen often. I'm very lucky because I mean, Spain is 2 hours and 30 minutes fly, so I can visit 3 times per year or so. But a lot of crying at the airport every single time.
I would just add, that of course it's inevitable. You're going to miss friends and family, but I think that especially if you make that effort to not be in a little foreigner bubble wherever you go to work, and you start building your social networks, and you have good friends, not just workmates, but good friends or people who share interests that you share, whether it's hiking or art or what have you, you build that network as well, and that helps a lot. I've gotten to the point now where a lot of my closest friends live in Cuba. So actually when I'm in the US, I'm missing them and I'm feeling guilty about leaving them. So, it's a very relative thing. And, but of course I miss my mom always, wherever I am. But now we have Zoom, and we have Google Hangouts and all of those other things. So it's not like it was 20, 30 years ago when, we were writing each other letters and waiting for that letter to show up in the mailbox.
Yes, the blessing and curse that is Zoom and all of those other wonderful technologies. So we are coming to the end of our hour, and there's a couple of questions in the chat, but maybe panelists, if you're all right, I'll add those in an email to you. And if you have an answer, we can then send those out with the recording link. Just a couple of questions there. I first of all, I want to thank the 3 of you, Gloria, Lesley, Rosanna, for your time, your experience, sharing this with us. To all of our folks who are in the audience, thank you for being here. And I have one question for you in our last 5 minutes. So obviously you all felt that this was a topic you were interested and wanted to learn more about. Are there other topics about either living and working internationally, about study abroad, things that you would love to see IFSA providing resources or talks like this, events like this in the future? Can't guarantee they'll all happen, but I would love to take just a quick poll. So if you have those ideas, feel free to drop them in the chat, or I think many of you probably found out about this through a various IFSA listserv. So if you have a program assistant or an IFSA in-country resident staff that you've worked with, also feel free to reach out to them. But if you do have